The taper is a part of marathon training that a lot of people get wrong, and with it being such an important part of your performance on the day, I thought it would be good to share my taper advice, my experience with past tapers, and how I've used that past experience to try and get it right this time. Also, if you stick around to the end of the video, I'll talk through my goals for Valencia, which is now only 6 days away. So the first question you might be asking is, what is a taper? A taper is when you reduce your training before a race, usually a longer race, and for the rest of this video we'll stick with tapering for the marathon. Basically, as you get closer to the race, your training tapers off so that you can be fresh, reduce tiredness, and perform at your best on race day. A taper can last anywhere from 3 weeks to just 1 week. And the key is really finding what works for you. And this will depend on your past experience with running, your training level currently, how many days a week you're running. It's just very individualised and something that you only learn by doing. There is, however, some general advice for the taper, which is going to really help you to be on the right track. The first piece of advice, which is a mistake that a lot of people make, including myself previously, is over tapering. You really want to feel fresh on race day, but you don't want to feel heavy, lethargic or stiff. You're trying to maintain fitness in the 3 weeks up to the marathon, so you can't just slam the brakes on training. This is a really fine balance and something that I've personally always struggled to get right. Maintaining fitness but reducing tiredness. But I'm going to talk you through my previous tapers in this video, and hopefully you're able to see that for yourself. Another mistake that I see people making is completely changing their training in the taper. For example, people who haven't been on a track for months thinking that they should do speed work in the last 2 weeks and go and do 10 400s on the track. At best, this is going to take longer to recover from, because it's such a different stimulus to what you've been used to, and at worst you're just risking injury by doing something you haven't really done. You have to reduce the volume and intensity a little bit, but do your best to keep the routine and structure that you've had to your training for the past few months. So no big changes. This applies to training and it applies to your diet. The last few weeks before a marathon is not the time for experimenting on anything. Valencia will be my 4th marathon and therefore my 4th taper. So let's quickly look through my previous tapers and see what I could have done better. This is my taper for my first marathon, London Marathon in 2021. And honestly, looking at it now, it's kind of crazy. I actually had to go back and double check that this spreadsheet was right because it just looks so wrong. I didn't do any sessions for a whole 8 days before this race, and the reason for this is that I had a goal that was not really achievable. I wasn't fit enough to hit this goal and I kind of needed a miracle to do it. So I tried to achieve that miracle by over tapering, being really fresh on race day, which obviously didn't work. You can't just stop doing sessions. You've been training so well, hopefully for about 12 weeks, and if you just stop doing sessions, you're going to feel like you're already on a break, and that's just not a good mindset to be in when you're trying to really perform in a marathon. So don't do this. You have to give your body some kind of stimulus on race week, whether that's a light session on a Wednesday, depending on what sort of training you've been doing before, or it could even be a slightly bigger session on the Tuesday and a really small session on the Thursday or Friday. As I said before, try and keep your routine, try and keep your structure as much as possible, and that's going to help you feel better on race day, but it's also going to help you mentally by just being ready to go when the time comes. I'm going to group the next 2 tapers together because honestly they're almost identical. The fact that I copied my Valencia 2023 taper for London 2024 shows that I didn't think I did too much wrong in this taper, and I didn't really do too much wrong in these tapers, but I still think I fell into the trap of over tapering. For both of these marathons, I trained really hard. I was running somewhere between 120 and 135 miles per week, with sessions totaling as much as 40k in volume. So to come back to 16k max volume in the last 2.5 weeks is probably just too much of a reduction. And the reason that I did this is because I got to 3 weeks out from the marathon and I was knackered because I'd been training so hard and I needed this taper. It was kind of the only thing keeping me going in the last week or two of training. It's like, I get to taper, and then the taper just ended up becoming a bit too much. I did the big sessions 2.5 weeks out, but after that, it was kind of too big of a reduction on the session volume. I think the actual mileage was good. Like, you can see that I went 85% of my total volume in the first week of the taper and around 60% of total volume in the second week of the taper. And I think that if the session volume followed that, then that would have been a much better approach to the taper. I'm going to say that I don't think the result in either of these marathons was affected by what I did in the taper, because I got cramp long before I was able to maximise my potential. However, I do think that 3 weeks before the race, I was probably a bit fitter than I was on race day, because I just detrained a little bit in the last 2.5 weeks. And that's something that I want to avoid this time, because if I'm not going to get cramp, which fingers crossed I'm not going to get cramp, then I really want to maximise that potential, see how fast I can run. And in order to do that, I need to be at my fittest and at my freshest on the 1st of December when the race comes. Moving on to this taper, it's not finished yet because I had to film and edit this video before flying to Valencia, but with less than a week to go, I can pretty confidently say what training I'm going to be doing in the next 5 days. But let's start with the first week of the taper. The reason that there's only one session in here is because I did the 3x10k on the Sunday, the day before this week started, and just wanted some extra recovery to make sure that I was not taking any tiredness into the taper and digging myself into a hole. So I waited until Friday to session and only did one session that week. I still kept the mileage pretty high in this week and was almost at 90% of my max volume, which was 106 miles in this block. Moving on to the second week of the taper, I still did some pretty big sessions on this week, with the last hard one being the 234-432 session that I made a video on, which was 12 days out from the marathon, but I still did 20 miles of total volume on the Friday. However, only 10k of this was at marathon pace, and the rest of it was either steady running or easy running. The reason for such a long run on the Friday was again just keeping that routine, keeping that structure. Pretty much every week I've did a session that ended up being over 20 miles, and that's been 20 miles of quite hard, quite intense running. So I'm kind of just keeping that volume, reducing it a little bit, because I've did a few sessions that have been over 20 miles, but keeping the volume sort of steady, reducing the intensity, but still getting some marathon pace work done on tired legs. I've found previously that I do not do well with breaks. If I have a few days off running, it takes me a while to get back feeling good again. So I'm really just trying to maintain that training effect. And as I said, just making sure I get to that marathon as fit as possible. I've been able to hit really good sessions in this block when I've been training really hard, so I don't feel like I need to reduce the volume and intensity too much, and I definitely will in the last week, and I have already. But for me personally, I think that slightly less of a taper is going to be something that works really well. In this second week of the taper, my easy running was cut quite a bit because my coach told me I was not allowed to run any more than 85 miles. And since the sessions were quite big, this did not leave a lot of room for easy running. So that's why my easy runs are so much shorter than they would usually be. And I think that really helped me start to feel fresher a lot earlier than I usually would. The other things that changed in my running last week were that I only did 6 hill strides instead of the standard 8, and that my long run, as well as being shorter, was also a bit slower than I would usually do it. Finally, the last week of training, the week that's not been completed yet, it will be a pretty big reduction in volume, but I'll still keep in 2 sessions on Tuesday and Friday, but they'll be pretty short and less intense than I have been doing, and the mileage will really taper off in the second half of the week. Partly because of travel, I'm flying to Valencia early on Thursday morning. Well, flying to Alicante and then driving 2 hours to Valencia. So it'll be quite a big travel day, so I'm only going to do about 4 miles on Thursday, and then just a light threshold session in Valencia on Friday, with a 2 mile shakeout on Saturday, which is less than I've really done before, but that'll be good for making sure that I'm really fresh when the race comes. Alongside a reduction in running volume, I also make a few other changes to my routine. The first is that I also taper off my strength work. Basically, my normal routine is to do 2 weight sessions and 2 core sessions every week. I've kept this consistent throughout the whole training block, but last week, so the second week of the taper, I did 1 full weight session on Tuesday, 1 full core session on Wednesday, which would have been 11 days out, and then I did quite a big reduction in weights and reps for my weight session on Saturday, and Sunday I did a core session with pretty big reduction in reps. And I won't do any strength work this week because I just don't think it's necessary at this point. I've also tried to shift my sleeping pattern back in the past few weeks. This isn't necessarily because of the taper or something that I would usually do, but there's going to be a couple of early alarms this week coming. The flight to Spain is at 6:15 in the morning, and the actual marathon starts at 8:15 in the morning. So if I want to eat 3 hours before, I need to be up at like 5 o'clock on the morning of the marathon. So to make sure that I'm still sleeping well on both of these nights and trying to get at least 8 hours, I'm just trying to go to bed a bit earlier. Like, I've been putting my phone away at 9 p.m. every night. Usually I'll just lie in bed and watch my laptop until I'm tired, but I've been trying to put all screens away, 9 p.m, read, get to sleep as early as I can, and I've been waking up at like 7 a.m, so that's good. That's much better than what I would usually do, and hopefully it's just a little 1% that can help me on race day. Last thing on the taper is, don't panic if you think you've picked up a little niggle, if you've got a tickle in the back of your throat, or if your legs just feel really heavy. That's just what happens as you approach a big race like a marathon. I think I've had all 3 of these things in the past 2 weeks. Still got them now, it's fine. They never come to anything. As soon as you turn up on race day, you forget about all of them and you're ready to go. So just don't worry about that. I don't think there's too much else to say on the taper, but if you've got any questions, please leave them in the comments. I'll get back to you on them. But let's move on to the part that you've all been waiting for, my race goals. Unfortunately, I think I'm going to disappoint all of you by saying that I don't have a specific time goal in mind. Of course I want to run a PB, and definitely not a PB that starts with 2:18 something, but the marathon is such a long way and I prefer to just set goals for the first half so that I know that I'm getting there at the pace that I want to get there at. I'm very unlikely to make any moves from halfway. My time goal at halfway is probably going to end up being my time goal at 30k as well. But you just never know how strong you're going to feel in the second half. So I don't want to say I want to run this time, because honestly I'm just going to run 30k at a pace and then give it everything in the last 12k. So that pace will be somewhere around 3:10s and 3:12s per k. Obviously that's a very short window. I'm hoping that I can find a good group going for the similar sort of pace, but that's what I'll aim for, 3:10 to 3:12 per k, which should get me to halfway about 67 minutes to 67:30. Do I think I can keep this going in the second half? Yes, or I would go off slower. At the end of the day, I just want to run a marathon that reflects my fitness, reflects my training, because I've just never been able to do that with the cramp. I'm always struggling in the second half, just try to hold it together, and it's never been a fitness issue in the last 10k of a marathon. So I just want to finish feeling like I was able to give it everything, able to squeeze everything out of myself, and whatever that result is, I'll be happy with it. So give me a follow on the app. I'm number 168. Expect to see 5Ks between 15:50 and 16 minutes. And I appreciate the support from everyone in this block. From starting this channel in July, it's been pretty mad to see how many people seem to genuinely care about my running and my training on here. So thank you for that. I really, really do appreciate it. And I'll see you after Valencia. Cheers.